video is about multiplying and dividing real numbers. It's lesson 11 in your book, and it's on pages 56 through 62. First, we're going to talk about some properties of real numbers, and the first one of those is the multiplication property of -1. This says that for every real number a times -1 is the same as -1 times a, which is the same as -a. Now, all this property really says is that when you multiply a number by -1, it changes the sign of that number. For example, if I want to multiply 3 by -1, that's the same as multiplying -1 times 3. And when I multiply -1 times 3, it changes the sign of my original number 3, so it becomes -3. Likewise, when I want to multiply -2 by -1, it's the same as multiplying -1 by -2, and it simply changes the sign of that original number. So it was negative, and when I multiply it by -1, it becomes +2. Now let's talk about the multiplication property of 0. This says that for every real number a times 0 equals 0. All that means is that whenever you multiply a number by 0, your answer is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. If I want to take 25 and multiply it by 0, I will get 0, because this means I am using 25 0 times. If I want to multiply a negative number, -8, say, by 0, I get the same answer, which is 0. So anything multiplied by 0 is 0. Now the inverse property of multiplication. This says that for every real number a where a does not equal 0, a times 1 over a equals 1 over a times a, which equals 1. Now all this says is that if you take a number and you multiply it by 1 over that number, or the reciprocal of that number, you'll get 1. Here's an example. If I have the number 2, that's my a, and I multiply it by 1 over 2, or its reciprocal, I should get 1. Now here's why this makes sense. If we write 2 as a fraction, it can be written as 2 over 1. When we multiply it by that reciprocal, 1 over 2, we get 2 divided by 2, and 1 divided by 1, which is just 1. Now this works for everything. Anytime you multiply a number by its reciprocal, you'll get 1. So if I have 3 halves, and I multiply it by 1 over 3 halves, remember here I'm dividing by a fraction, which is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So it's kind of like 3 halves times 2/3. Whoops, that's a 3. And when I multiply 3 halves times 2/3, my 3's cancel, and my 2's cancel, and I'm left with just 1. Now if you're asked to find the multiplicative inverse of a number, all you have to do is state its reciprocal. So if my number is -4, and I need the multiplicative inverse, again this is -4 for 1, I can say its multiplicative inverse is -1 over 4. Multiplicative inverse just means the reciprocal. Now some rules about multiplying and dividing signed numbers. The first rule is that when you're dividing or multiplying two numbers with the same sign, your answer will be a positive number. So anytime your signs match, your answer is going to be positive. For example, if I multiply +4 times +2, here these are both positive, so my answer is a +8. If I multiply -5 times a -3, my signs match, negative times a negative, and my answer is a +15. Anytime they have the same sign, your answer will be positive. The product or quotient of two numbers with opposite signs is going to be a negative number. Now remember, this applies to multiplication and division. Anytime your signs don't match, your answer will be negative. For example, if I were to divide positive 16 by negative 8, positive divided by a negative means my answer will be negative, and then I simply divide the number 16 divided by 8 is 2. If I want to multiply negative 2 times a positive 3, again, negative times a positive will always be a negative, and then I just multiply the numbers. 2 times 3 is 6. Here are some examples of multiplying and dividing real numbers, and these are the ones that you're definitely going to want to put in your notes. My first one here is negative 16 divided by negative 2. Notice I have a negative divided by a negative, so I know my answer will be positive. Now I just divide my numbers. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Alright, over here I have negative 2/3 divided by negative 3/4. Now notice they're both negative, so I know my answer will be positive. Now I just have to divide the numbers. I'm dividing by a fraction, which remember is the same thing as multiplying by a reciprocal. So I can rewrite this as negative 2/3, and instead of divided by, it's going to be times the reciprocal of negative 3/4, which is negative 4/3. Now when I multiply fractions, I do straight across, top times top, bottom times bottom. Remember, negative and a negative make a positive. 2 times 4 gets me 8. And on the bottom, 3 times 3 gets me 9. So negative 2/3 divided by negative 3/4 is a positive 8/9. Here we have negative 6 times negative 0.7. Notice my signs match, negative times a negative, so my answer is going to be positive. And when I multiply 6 times 0.7, I get 4.2. Now I've got 2.8 divided by negative 7. I've got a positive divided by a negative. My signs don't match this time, so I know my answer is going to be a negative number. And when I divide 2.8 by negative 7, I get negative 0.4. Again, make sure this page is written down in your notes. Here I have 2/9 divided by negative 3/5. I've got a positive divided by a negative, so I know that this time my answer is going to be negative because those signs don't match. Again, I'm dividing by a fraction, which is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I can rewrite this as 2/9, and then instead of division, times negative 5/3, which is the reciprocal of 3/5. Again, positive times a negative gets me a negative answer. 2 times 5 is 10. And 9 times 3 is 27. So 2/9 divided by negative 3/5 gets me a negative 10 over 27. And 10 and 27 don't have a greatest common factor other than 1, so we can't reduce that any. And finally here, we've got a positive 4 times a negative 8. Signs don't match, so our answer is going to be negative. And 4 times 8 is 32. Now the last thing we're going to talk about is raising numbers to powers, especially negative numbers. We know that when we raise numbers to powers, those powers just tell us how many times we multiply that particular number. So here we've got negative 3 to the 4th power. These parentheses imply that the negative is part of what we're raising to the 4th power. Remember, they're symbols of inclusion, so everything inside them is included in the operation. So here we're raising negative 3 to the 4th power. That means we're multiplying negative 3. So that's a negative 3 times a negative 3, etc., 4 times. And when we multiply left to right. So negative 3 times a negative 3 is a positive 9. And then I've got my other two negative 3's hanging on here. positive 9 times negative 3 is a negative 27. And then I've got that last negative 3. And then here I've got a negative times a negative, so my answer is a positive 81. So negative 3 to the fourth power is positive 81. Now let's look at negative 3 to the third power. Again, I've got parentheses, which means that that negative is included in what I'm raising to the power. So I've got 3 negative 3's that I'm multiplying. Negative 3 times a negative 3, signs match, so that gets me a positive 9. And a positive 9 times a negative 3 gets me a negative 27. So negative 3 to the third power is a negative 27. Now notice that there's a pattern here. When we have negative 3 to the fourth power, which is an even number, we get a positive answer. That's because we're multiplying these negatives an even number of times, and we're eliminating that negative. When we multiply negative 3 to the third power, which is an odd power, we're multiplying a negative an odd number of times. And that's why we're ending up with a negative number. Anytime you take a negative number to an even power, your answer will be positive. And when you take a negative number to an odd power, your answer is going to be negative. Now down here we have negative 3 to the fourth power, and notice the difference here is we don't have parentheses around that negative 3. That means that the negative is not included in what's being taken to the fourth power, because it's not in symbols of inclusion. So what we're really taking to the fourth power is 3. We're taking 3 to the fourth power, so 3 4 times, and we're also making it negative. Now when we do that, we've got that negative on the outside, and we've got 3 times 3, which is 9, and then we've got those two other 3's out there. We'll simplify that further. We've still got that negative out there. 9 times 3 is 27. And when we do that final multiplication, we still have that negative out there, and 27 times 3 is 81. So our answer there is negative 81. Now that rule I said about even powers being positive and odd powers being negative only applies if the negative is inside the parentheses. Otherwise, you're taking the number to the power and then just making it negative at the end.